The quiet hum of a Sunday afternoon settled over our house, the kind of stillness that can feel both comforting and a little lonely. David, my husband, had impulsively decided to join his buddies for a last-minute golf trip, leaving me with an unusually quiet weekend. Most of the day I'd busied myself with small tasks around the house, finding a strange sort of peace in the rhythm of tidying up. But now, as the afternoon sun slanted through the kitchen window, a restless energy began to stir within me. Upstairs I could faintly hear the muffled beat of music coming from Scarlett's room. My stepdaughter, all of 23, had a vibrant energy that usually filled the house, but today even her music seemed subdued. Our relationship with Scarlett had always been easy, a comfortable blend of mutual respect and affection. She had a confident air about her, as most young adults do, but there were also moments when a quiet, more introspective side would emerge. I valued the easy connection we shared. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was steady and reassuring. After wiping down the kitchen counters for what felt like the 10th time, I poured myself a glass of iced tea and stood by the window, letting the warmth of the sun soak into my skin. The calm should have been soothing, but instead it amplified the subtle unease that had been nagging at me. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, just a vague sense of restlessness that made it hard to simply sit still. A moment later, I found myself drawn towards the stairs. Scarlett's music was still playing softly, and as I reached the top landing, I noticed her bedroom door was slightly ajar, a thin sliver of light and sound escaping into the hallway. I hesitated, wondering if I should knock or just leave her be. We usually respected each other's privacy, but something, perhaps just a touch of that lingering restlessness, nudged me forward. I approached the door, intending to call out to her, but the sight through the narrow gap stopped me in my tracks. Scarlett was sitting on the edge of her bed, her posture relaxed yet intensely focused. Her head was bent over her phone, which she held in both hands, and her fingers were moving with a rhythmic purpose that I couldn't immediately understand. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, her lips slightly parted. My breath hitched in my throat as I realized she was completely engrossed in whatever was on that screen. The intimacy of the moment unfolding before me made me feel like I should turn away, should grant her the privacy she undoubtedly thought she had. But instead, I stood frozen, a strange mix of surprise and intrigue holding me captive. There was something about the vulnerability of the scene, the way Scarlett seemed completely unaware of the world outside her room, that kept me rooted to the spot. The soft afternoon light bathed the room in a gentle glow, casting subtle shadows that accentuated the delicate curve of her shoulders and the smooth line of her neck. I knew I shouldn't be watching, that it was an invasion of her personal space, but the sight of her so open and unguarded stirred something within me, a flicker of curiosity, an unspoken question that I couldn't ignore. Before I could gather my thoughts and retreat, Scarlett suddenly looked up. Her eyes, a startling shade of hazel, met mine directly through the narrow gap in the door. Time seemed to stop. Her expression shifted in an instant, the focused concentration replaced by a look of utter surprise, quickly followed by a wave of embarrassment and uncertainty. Her fingers on her phone stilled for a moment, and an awkward silence hung in the air between us. My mouth opened, but no words came out. My heart began to pound in my chest, a chaotic rhythm that seemed to echo in my ears. Scarlett was the first to react. Her cheeks flushed a deep red as she quickly reached for a throw blanket lying at the foot of her bed and draped it over her lap. "I didn't think you'd come upstairs," she mumbled, her voice low and thick with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry," I blurted out, my own face burning with a heat that matched hers. I instinctively took a step back from the door. "I didn't mean to." The words tumbled out in a rush, a jumbled apology for something I wasn't even sure I fully understood. Scarlett shook her head slightly, raising a hand as if to stop me. "It's fine," she said quickly, though her voice still trembled slightly. Just give me a minute." I nodded, feeling a wave of guilt wash over me. I retreated down the hallway to the top of the stairs, my thoughts a jumbled mess of confusion and awkwardness. I shouldn't have lingered. I definitely shouldn't have watched. But the image of Scarlett, so vulnerable and unguarded, was now burned into my mind, a silent question hanging in the air between us. I lingered at the top of the stairs, gripping the smooth wooden banister, trying to process the brief, awkward encounter. My mind raced, replaying the image of Scarlett on her bed, the sudden embarrassment in her eyes when she saw me. What exactly had she been doing? My initial curiosity was now mixed with a sense of guilt for having invaded her privacy. The soft click of Scarlett's bedroom door opening pulled me from my thoughts. She stepped out into the hallway, her gaze deliberately fixed on the opposite wall, avoiding any direct eye contact. She had changed quickly, swapping her previous outfit for a simple t-shirt and a pair of shorts. "Sorry about that," Scarlett said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper as she leaned against the doorframe, her arms crossed loosely over her chest. "I didn't mean for you to see that." "It's okay," I replied quickly, my voice softer than usual, trying to sound reassuring. "Honestly, I should have knocked. I wasn't thinking." Scarlett nodded slowly, finally meeting my gaze for a fleeting moment before quickly looking away again, a faint blush still visible on her cheeks. "I guess we're even now," she said, a nervous chuckle escaping her lips. "Even?" I asked, tilting my head slightly in confusion. What could she possibly mean by that? Scarlett shrugged, a small, almost sheepish smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "You walked in on me. I walked in on you. Remember last summer when you forgot to lock the bathroom door?" The memory hit me like a jolt, and a wave of heat rushed to my own face. I had completely forgotten about that incredibly awkward moment when Scarlett had mistakenly walked in on me after my shower. We had both been mortified at the time, but eventually we had managed to laugh it off. "Oh, right," I said, a nervous laugh escaping my own lips this time. "I guess you're right. We're definitely even." The shared memory seemed to act as a small bridge between the awkwardness of the present moment and the easy familiarity we usually shared. The tension in the hallway seemed to ease ever so slightly, but even as we both chuckled softly, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between us, a subtle undercurrent that hadn't been there before. Scarlett continued to lean against the doorframe, her arms still crossed, but her posture seemed a little less tense now. I wasn't sure what to say next. Part of me wanted to just retreat downstairs and give her the space she clearly needed, the space I had inadvertently invaded. But something in the way her gaze flickered towards me every now and then, hesitant yet searching, kept me rooted to the spot. It wasn't exactly discomfort I saw in her eyes, but something softer, almost vulnerable that made me want to stay and understand. So taking a deep breath, I spoke finally, my voice softer than I had intended. Do you want to talk about it?" Scarlett's eyes widened slightly, and the blush on her cheeks seemed to deepen. "Talk about what?" she asked, her tone laced with a nervous humor that didn't quite reach her eyes. I offered her a small, gentle smile, hoping to ease the remaining tension. "About anything. You don't have to if you don't want to, of course, but I just thought maybe you'd feel better if you did." Scarlett hesitated, her gaze dropping to the worn carpet of the hallway as she rubbed the back of her neck, a gesture I knew meant she was feeling unsure. "I don't know," she admitted after a moment, her voice barely audible. "It's kind of embarrassing." I took a step closer, keeping my movements slow and deliberate, as though approaching a skittish animal. "Scarlett," I said softly, It's okay to feel embarrassed. Everyone has moments like that. There's nothing to be ashamed of. Her lips curled into a faint, self-deprecating smile. Yeah, but not everyone gets caught by their stepmom, she said, the words coming out as a half-joke, half-mortified whisper. The way she said it made me laugh softly, a genuine, warm sound that broke some of the remaining tension in the air. To my surprise, Scarlett's smile widened just slightly in response, a hint of her usual bright energy returning. I guess not, I admitted, leaning against the opposite wall to mirror her posture, trying to appear casual and non-threatening. But hey, if it helps, I've been in plenty of embarrassing situations too. Trust me, you're not alone in that department. Scarlett looked up at me then, her expression softening, the earlier embarrassment slowly fading away. Yeah, she said quietly, but you're always so composed, like you have everything together all the time. The comment caught me off guard. I felt a sudden pang of something I couldn't quite name, perhaps a touch of sadness, or maybe just surprise. Oh, Scarlett, I said quietly, shaking my head slightly. I'm not as composed as you think. Trust me, I've had my fair share of moments where I didn't know what I was doing, where I felt completely lost. Scarlett studied me for a moment, her brow furrowing slightly, as if she was trying to reconcile the image she had of me with the more vulnerable person standing before her. It's just weird, she said finally, her voice almost thoughtful. You're so different from Dad. Not in a bad way, just different. I wasn't quite sure how to respond to that, so I settled for a soft, different can be good sometimes, right? Scarlett nodded slowly, though her expression remained thoughtful. Yeah, she said after a pause, her gaze drifting away for a moment before returning to me. I guess it can. A comfortable silence settled between us again, this time feeling less heavy, less charged with awkwardness. I could see the tension in Scarlett's shoulders ease further, and the faint lines of worry around her eyes seemed to soften as she leaned back against the doorframe. I'm sorry you had to see that, Scarlett said after another moment, her tone more sincere this time. I wasn't really thinking. I guess I just forgot you were home. It's okay, I said quickly, hoping to reassure her that I wasn't judging her. Really, it's not a big deal. I just wanted to make sure you were okay. Scarlett nodded, though she still avoided my direct gaze, her eyes flicking towards the floor. Yeah, I'm fine, she replied, but there was a slight hesitation in her voice that made me wonder if she was telling me the whole truth. It's just, I don't know, it's hard to explain. I tilted my head slightly, my curiosity now genuinely piqued. Hard to explain how? I prompted gently. Scarlett hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her t-shirt. It's just, being around people is hard sometimes, you know? Like, I always feel like I'm supposed to be a certain way, and when I'm not, it feels like I'm doing something wrong. Her words hit me harder than I expected. I felt a sudden pang of empathy for her. It couldn't be easy being a young adult, navigating all the expectations and pressures of the world. Scarlett, I said softly, taking another step closer, my voice filled with genuine concern. You don't have to be anything other than yourself. You don't have to meet anyone's expectations. Not mine, not your dad's, not anyone's. You just need to be true to who you are. Scarlett looked up at me then, her eyes wide and searching, and for a brief moment I saw the vulnerability she usually kept so carefully hidden beneath her confident exterior. You really think that? She asked, her voice soft, almost hesitant. I know that, I said firmly, meeting her gaze with a reassuring smile. You're a good person, Scarlett. You don't have to prove anything to anyone. The corners of Scarlett's mouth twitched into a faint smile, and I could see the tension in her posture ease even further. "Thanks," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're welcome," I replied, my own voice soft. We stood there for a moment longer, the silence between us feeling almost companionable now, a sense of understanding passing between us without the need for many words. I could see the faint traces of a smile lingering on Scarlett's lips, and I felt a sense of relief that she seemed to be feeling a little better. But even as the immediate tension eased, I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had shifted between us, a new layer added to our relationship that we would both have to navigate. The way Scarlett looked at me then, a lingering gaze that held a hint of something more than just gratitude, made a strange warmth spread through my chest. It was a look that made my heart flutter in a way I hadn't experienced in years, a sensation that was both unexpected and a little unsettling. Finally, with a faint sigh, Scarlett straightened up, pushing herself off the doorframe. I should probably do something productive," she said, her tone lighter now, but still tinged with a subtle hesitation. "Take your time," I replied with a small, reassuring smile. "You don't have to rush into anything." Scarlett nodded, her eyes meeting mine for one last, slightly longer moment before she turned and disappeared back into her room, the door clicking softly shut behind her. I stood there for a moment longer, staring at the closed door, a strange mix of emotions swirling within me. Confusion, curiosity, and something else, something I couldn't quite name, but I knew with a certainty that things between Scarlett and me would never be exactly the same. The rest of the afternoon passed in a bit of a daze. I tried to distract myself with more chores, but my mind kept wandering back to that moment in the hallway, to the vulnerability in Scarlett's eyes and the unspoken words that seemed to hang in the air between us. By the time evening rolled around, I felt emotionally drained. I settled onto the couch with a book, hoping to lose myself in a fictional world and escape the whirlwind of my thoughts. But the words on the page blurred together, and my attention kept drifting back to the closed door at the top of the stairs. The sound of soft footsteps descending the stairs finally broke through my haze. I looked up to see Scarlett coming down, her hair slightly disheveled as if she had been lying down. There was an air of uncertainty about her that made my chest tighten slightly. "Hey," she said softly, pausing at the bottom of the stairs. "I was going to make some tea. Want me to make you a cup?" The simple offer caught me off guard, and I nodded before I could overthink it. "That would be nice, thanks, Scarlett." She disappeared into the kitchen, and after a moment, unable to resist the pull of her presence, I followed. When I stepped into the room, she was already filling the kettle, her movements calm and deliberate. The soft hum of the boiling water soon filled the space, mingling with the faint clinking of cups as she set them on the counter. "Do you still like honey in yours?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder at me. "Yes, please," I replied, leaning against the counter as I watched her. Her tone was casual, but I couldn't help noticing the subtle precision in her movements, as if she were trying to focus on the task at hand to avoid something else. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the space between us filled only by the sound of the kettle. I wanted to say something to address the lingering tension in the air, but the words wouldn't quite form. When the tea was ready, Scarlett handed me a mug, the ceramic warm against my hands, and leaned against the counter opposite me. She took a small sip, her gaze fixed on the steam rising from her cup. "I've been thinking about what you said," she finally spoke, her voice quiet but steady. I tilted my head slightly, waiting for her to continue. "About not needing to live up to others' expectations," she went on. "I think I've spent so much time trying to be what others want that I've forgotten what I want for myself." Her words struck me deeply, resonating with some of my own past struggles. I carefully set my mug down on the counter, suddenly feeling a little unsteady. "Scarlett," I said quietly. It's okay to feel like that. You're still figuring things out, and that's perfectly fine. You don't have to have all the answers right now. She nodded slowly, her gaze finally meeting mine, and I could see a hint of vulnerability in her hazel eyes. But what if I'm afraid to find out? What if I don't like what I discover? The raw honesty in her voice made my throat tighten. I took a deep breath before replying, trying to choose my words carefully. It's okay to be scared, Scarlett, I said, my own voice quivering slightly with empathy. But you're stronger than you think. You don't have to face it all at once. Take it one step at a time, and trust that you'll find your way. Scarlett's lips curved into a faint smile, though her eyes didn't quite reflect it. You make it sound so easy. It's not, I admitted, my own smile tinged with sadness. But you're not alone. I'm here for you, no matter what. For a moment she just looked at me, her gaze steady and searching. The vulnerability in her eyes was almost unbearable, and I felt an odd pull in my chest, an ache I couldn't quite explain. Thanks, she said softly, her voice barely audible. You don't have to thank me, I replied gently, my voice barely a whisper. That's what family is for. Scarlett nodded, but her expression remained thoughtful, as if there was more she wanted to say but couldn't quite bring herself to voice. I waited, giving her the space she seemed to need, but the moment passed. She took another slow sip of her tea, and the silence between us, while not uncomfortable, was heavy, laden with unspoken thoughts and emotions. Neither of us seemed quite ready to confront whatever lay beneath the surface. Finally, Scarlett straightened up and set her mug down on the counter with a soft clink. I think I'm going to head to bed, she said, her voice light but with a noticeable hint of hesitation. Okay, I said, my voice quieter than I meant. Good night, Scarlett. Good night, she replied, her gaze lingering on me for a moment longer than necessary before she turned and disappeared back upstairs. I stayed in the kitchen for a while after she left, my thoughts a jumbled mess of confusion and a strange sense of longing. The weight of the day pressed down on me, and I felt an odd mix of emotions, worry, tenderness, and something deeper, something that still eluded definition. Later, as I climbed the stairs to my own room, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Something significant had shifted between Scarlett and me, something unspoken yet undeniably present, and I knew deep down that no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, it would likely only grow stronger. The house was quiet again, but it felt different now. The air seemed thicker, as though the unspoken words between Scarlett and me had somehow soaked into the walls, lingering in every corner. I lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, the soft rustling of the trees outside doing little to calm the restless energy churning inside me. My thoughts kept returning to Scarlett. Her expression, the vulnerability in her voice, the way her eyes had lingered on mine for just a moment too long. There was something there, something I couldn't quite put into words, but it was undeniably present. After what felt like hours of tossing and turning, I gave up on sleep. The stillness of the house was stifling, and I felt an overwhelming need to move, to do something to shake off the restless energy that had settled over me. Slipping quietly out of bed, I walked down the hallway, the soft glow of moonlight casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. I wasn't sure where I was going, but my feet seemed to have a direction of their own, carrying me almost instinctively toward Scarlett's room. As I approached, I noticed her door was slightly ajar, a faint, warm glow of lamplight spilling out into the hallway. I hesitated for a moment, my heart suddenly racing, debating whether to knock or just turn back. But before I could make a decision, I heard her voice, soft, but with a distinct hint of uncertainty. You can come in. Swallowing hard, I pushed the door open gently and stepped inside. Scarlett was sitting on the edge of her bed, just as I had seen her earlier, her hands resting loosely in her lap. Her hair was slightly tousled, and the faint shadows under her eyes suggested she hadn't been able to sleep either. She looked up at me, a small, tired smile gracing her lips. It felt different this time, though, less awkward, more shared. "Can't sleep?" I asked softly, leaning against the doorframe. She shook her head, offering a small, tired smile. "Too much on my mind, I guess." I nodded, fully aware that the same was true for me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us filled with the quiet hum of the lamp on her nightstand. I could feel the tension in the air, still present, but somehow different. Less like awkwardness, more like a charged anticipation. "I've been thinking," Scarlett suddenly said, breaking the silence, her voice barely above a whisper, "about what you said earlier, about not needing to meet anyone's expectations." I stepped further into the room, closing the door softly behind me. "What about it?" I asked gently, my gaze meeting hers. Scarlett hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands, which she was now twisting nervously in her lap. "It's just hard to believe sometimes. I feel like I've spent my whole life trying to be what others want me to be, and I don't know how to stop." Her words resonated deeply within me, echoing some of my own past insecurities. I crossed the small space between us and sat beside her on the bed, the mattress dipping slightly under my weight. "Scarlett," I said softly, placing a hand gently on her arm, feeling the warmth of her skin beneath my fingertips. "You don't have to figure it all out right now. It's okay to take things one step at a time." She looked up at me, her eyes filled with a complex mix of uncertainty and something deeper, something that made my heart skip a beat. "What if I don't even know who I am without all that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. I squeezed her arm gently, my own emotions swirling as I tried to find the right words. "You're still you, Scarlett. The expectations don't define you. You're more than that, even if it doesn't feel like it right now." Scarlett's gaze lingered on mine, and I could feel the weight of her emotions in the small space between us. "You make it sound so simple," she said, a faint, wistful smile forming on her lips. "It's not," I admitted, my voice quieter now. "But that doesn't mean it's impossible. You're stronger than you think." For a moment, the silence returned, but it wasn't uncomfortable. I could feel the warmth of her presence beside me, the soft hum of the lamp casting a gentle glow over the room. It was as if the rest of the world had faded away, leaving just the two of us in this shared, intimate moment. "Thank you," Scarlett said finally, her voice steady but laced with a raw emotion that tugged at my heart. "You don't have to thank me," I replied softly, my gaze still locked with hers. Even as the immediate tension seemed to dissipate, I couldn't ignore the way her eyes lingered on mine. A silent question hanging in the air, or the way my own heart was beginning to race in response. There was something undeniably shifting between us, something neither of us was fully acknowledging, yet both were acutely aware of. Scarlett shifted slightly, her hand inadvertently brushing against mine as she adjusted her position. The contact was brief, almost accidental, but it sent a surprising shiver through me, my breath catching in my throat. "I don't know what I'd do without you," she said quietly, her gaze dropping to our hands, where they now rested side by side on the soft blanket. "You'll never have to find out," I replied, my voice trembling just slightly, the unspoken words hanging heavy between us. Scarlett looked up at me again, her eyes searching mine with an intensity that made the air in the room feel thick and charged. In that moment, I knew with a certainty that resonated deep within my bones that nothing between us would ever be the same. Scarlett's gaze held mine steady and searching, and I felt the weight of her eyes in every fiber of my being. My heart raced with each beat, loud and insistent in my ears as the moment stretched between us, thick with unspoken emotions. I knew I should look away, should say something to ease the tension, to return us to the comfortable familiarity we'd always shared, but I couldn't. I was frozen, caught in the intensity of her expression, the vulnerability and a nascent yearning I saw reflected in her hazel depths. Scarlett shifted again, her hand brushing against mine. This time, neither of us moved away. The contact was electric, a jolt that sent a shiver down my spine, leaving my skin tingling. My breath caught in my throat, and a warmth spread through my chest that I couldn't ignore. "You've always been there for me," Scarlett said softly, her voice low and filled with a raw emotion that mirrored my own inner turmoil, even when I didn't know how to ask for help. A rush of emotions washed over me at her words, and I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "Scarlett," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "you don't have to say that. You've always been important to me. I just want you to be happy." Scarlett's lips curved into a faint, bittersweet smile. "I don't know what happiness looks like for me yet," she admitted, her gaze falling to where our fingers still barely brushed. "But I know that when I'm around you, I feel like I can figure it out." The vulnerability in her voice made my chest ache, and I felt a strong, almost overwhelming urge to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay. But as I opened my mouth to speak, the words wouldn't come. Instead, I reached out and gently curled my fingers around her hand, my thumb softly stroking the back of hers. Scarlett looked up at me, her eyes wide and filled with something I couldn't quite name, a mixture of hope and trepidation. "I don't want to mess this up," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're not going to mess anything up," I replied softly, my voice surprisingly steady now. "Let me help you with whatever you're dealing with." For a moment, neither of us moved, the silence between us thick and charged with an unspoken understanding. Then Scarlett leaned in slowly, her movements hesitant, almost uncertain, as though she was waiting for me to stop her. I didn't. Her lips brushed against mine, tentative, feather-light. My heart skipped a beat, and a wave of warmth washed over me. The kiss was soft, almost hesitant, but it sent a spark through me that I couldn't deny. My hands moved instinctively, one resting on her arm, the other cupping her cheek, my fingers brushing against the smooth skin of her jawline. For a moment, the rest of the world disappeared. There was no sound, no light, no time. Only the gentle pressure of her lips against mine, the steady thrum of my heartbeat, and the overwhelming sense of connection between us. When we finally pulled away, our foreheads resting against each other, a rush of emotion surged through me, confusion, a flicker of fear, but also a deep, undeniable sense of something brighter, something significant that I couldn't quite explain. "Scarlett," I began softly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I know," she interrupted quickly, her voice trembling slightly. "I know it's complicated. I needed you to know how I feel." My chest tightened at her words, and I exhaled shakily, my hand still resting on her arm. "This isn't something we can take lightly," I said softly, my voice trying to remain steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. "I'm not," she replied earnestly, her gaze never leaving mine. "I've thought about this a lot. I've tried to ignore it, to push it away, but I can't. You're the one person who makes me feel like I can be myself." Her honesty was both heartbreaking and comforting, and I felt a pang of guilt for the unexpected emotions stirring within me. This was uncharted territory, and I wasn't sure where to go from here. But as I looked into her eyes, I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't ignore what was happening between us. "I care about you, Scarlett," I said finally, my voice trembling just a bit more than I intended. "More than you probably realize, but we need to be careful. We need to think about what this means." Scarlett nodded, her gaze never wavering. "I know. I don't want to lose this, whatever this is. I don't want it to go away." "It doesn't have to," I said softly, my hands falling to my lap. "But we have to take it slow. We have to be sure." Scarlett nodded again, her expression a mixture of determination and a fragile vulnerability. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes," she said quietly. The sincerity in her voice made my chest ache, and I offered her a small, tentative smile. "We'll figure it out," I said, my voice gaining a bit more steadiness. "Together." Scarlett's lips curved into a faint, hopeful smile, and for the first time that evening I felt a sense of calm wash over me. The tension that had filled the room seemed to ease, replaced by a quiet understanding that while things might not be simple, we would face them together. As I stood to leave, a silent agreement passing between us, Scarlett reached out, her fingers brushing mine in a fleeting but meaningful gesture of connection. I looked back at her, my heart swelling with a mix of emotions I couldn't fully name: tenderness, a touch of fear, and a burgeoning sense of something new. I squeezed her hand gently before stepping out of the room, leaving the door slightly ajar as I had found it. The hallway felt quieter now, the weight in the air somehow lighter. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There were so many complexities to consider, so many potential pitfalls. But as I made my way back to my own room, a sense of unexpected hope flickered within me. Whatever came next, we would face it together. Lying in bed, the events of the day replayed in my mind. The unexpected turn our relationship had taken left me both bewildered and, strangely, hopeful. I closed my eyes, the image of Scarlett's vulnerable gaze imprinted on my eyelids. What had started as a simple offer of help had unexpectedly led us down a path neither of us could have predicted. Was it right? Was it wrong? All I knew was that in that moment, with Scarlett's lips on mine, it felt undeniably real, and I couldn't deny the feelings that were beginning to bloom in my heart. What do you think? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where offering help led to something completely unexpected? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.